She was fined $1,000 for uncut grass she'd mowed 2 days earlier. No warning, no appeal. The HOA president, Leonard McKee, was running a profit scheme with his cousin's landscaping firm, targeting quiet homeowners like Samantha. But Samantha didn't argue. She bought the entire company and exposed everything. Just wait until you see how this quiet woman turned the whole game upside down, and why justice hit harder than anyone expected. Samantha Bailey had spent her entire adult life guiding children through cursive handwriting and multiplication tables, never once raising her voice louder than necessary. After retiring from her job as a second-grade teacher, she settled into the quiet rhythm of her late parents' home, an aging but tidy ranch-style house nestled at the edge of Oak Bridge Lakes. She liked the smell of lilacs in the spring, the way the wind rustled the mailbox in the afternoon, and the sound of sprinklers at dusk. She didn't ask for much. She paid her dues, trimmed her hedges, and tried her best to stay out of anyone's way. The garden wasn't fancy, just some wildflowers and marigolds around the walkway, but she tended to it every week with the care of someone who believed effort mattered more than perfection. That's why, on a heavy, muggy morning in early July, Samantha blinked twice at the envelope in her mailbox. The return address bore the seal of the Oak Bridge Lakes Homeowners Association, and inside was a typed letter clipped to 3 grainy black and white photos. The letter accused her of failure to maintain lawn height as outlined in Section 4.9 of the Neighborhood Aesthetic Code. The fine, $1,000. The photos showed her front yard from across the street, taken on an overcast day. You could barely even call it overgrown. The grass might have been a 1/4 inch taller than usual. Her mower was clearly visible in the driveway in one of the shots, handle tilted upward, like it had just been used. And it had, 2 days earlier. There had been no prior notice, no knock at the door, not even a friendly warning taped to the mailbox. Just a formal violation, a cold list of legal codes, and a closing threat. Failure to remit payment within 5 business days may result in the initiation of property lien procedures. The signature at the bottom read, Leonard McKee, President, Oak Bridge Lakes Compliance Committee. Samantha recognized the name immediately. Leonard was the man who barked about visual standards at board meetings, the same one who once measured the length of his neighbor's gutter chain with a ruler. A former insurance adjuster with a taste for rules and a chip on his shoulder, Leonard had somehow turned HOA enforcement into his personal crusade, and now she was his latest target. Samantha stared at the paper in her lap for a long minute, her hands still trembling. It wasn't just the fine. It was the way it was delivered, with no dialogue, no context, no humanity. A punishment, not a conversation. A threat, not a request. For the first time in her peaceful life, Samantha Bailey felt something she hadn't felt since she'd been a young teacher accused of favoritism for giving a hungry student a second carton of milk, that cold, sharp sting of being treated unfairly and not being allowed to say a word in her own defense. Samantha did what any reasonable person would do. She called the number listed at the bottom of the violation letter, hoping for an explanation, or at the very least a conversation. What she got instead was a voicemail system that looped twice before routing her to a young-sounding assistant named Trevor. His voice was flat, his responses clipped and memorized. When she asked to speak directly with Leonard McKee, the HOA president, Trevor replied without hesitation. Mr. McKee doesn't take calls regarding active violations. Compliance is non-negotiable. Samantha tried to explain that she had mowed her lawn 2 days prior, that the fine was a mistake, that perhaps the photos were outdated. Trevor didn't budge. Ma'am, the compliance team follows documented procedures. If there's a fine, it means it was warranted. She hung up the phone with her stomach in knots, but it was what she saw later that day that twisted those knots into something else. Leonard's own yard, just 2 blocks over, looked like it had been abandoned for a month. The grass was yellowing in patches, the edges ragged and full of crabgrass. A rusted folding chair sat on its side near the front walk. One sprinkler head was snapped and sputtering into the street, flooding the curb. And yet, no violation notice sat taped to his door. No official photos, no threat of a lien. Just a man who made the rules and exempted himself from them. That night, Samantha took a walk through the neighborhood. She needed air, but more than that, she needed to know if she was alone in this. She wasn't. In hushed tones by mailboxes and over back fences, neighbors started to share their own stories. Amanda in Lot 37 had been fined $600 for a sunflower bed her daughter had planted for a school project. Jared across the pond got a $250 notice for having his garbage bins visible, 10 minutes before trash pickup. One elderly couple was penalized for excessive chimes from a wind ornament. It all followed the same pattern: vague infractions, excessive fees, and no room for discussion. But the thread that tied it all together came from Tom, a retired contractor on the south side of the development. "You know who takes all the pictures, right?" he asked, leaning over his porch rail. "It's that landscaping outfit the HOA uses, Mid-State Groundskeeping. That's Leonard's cousin's company. Been billing the HOA for compliance inspections since March." Samantha froze. The same company that was supposed to trim community hedges and maintain shared spaces was also producing the photographic evidence used to fine residents, under Leonard's approval. This wasn't about grass. It wasn't about neighborhood standards. It was about power and profit. And somewhere between that phone call and that final porch conversation, something inside Samantha turned. They'd mistaken her quiet nature for weakness, her patience for submission, her simplicity for ignorance. They thought she'd pay the fine and disappear. They had no idea what she was about to do. Samantha didn't scream. She didn't storm into the HOA office with paperwork in hand. She didn't rant on social media or tape protest signs to her porch. She took a drive. It was early afternoon, the heat baking the windshield, as she followed a hand-drawn map she'd made the night before. The address came from a flyer Leonard himself had once proudly included in a quarterly HOA mailer, back when he was boasting about streamlined community services. At the top of the flyer was the name Mid-State Groundskeeping, proudly servicing Oak Bridge HOA properties. At the bottom, a downtown office suite in a strip center just outside city limits. The place was smaller than she expected. 2 trucks in the lot, one sun-faded sign, and a tired-looking receptionist who called back, "Roger, lady here about a service contract." Roger Greer emerged a few moments later, blinking like someone who'd been doing math in a dark room too long. He was younger than Leonard but wore the same smug familiarity. Samantha introduced herself, said she was looking for lawn services, private services outside of HOA scope, and then she asked him a single question. "Are you still accepting new clients?" Roger hesitated, then smiled. "Depends on the budget." She didn't flinch. "I'd like to discuss purchasing your business." He laughed at first, but Samantha didn't. She simply reached into her bag, pulled out a slim envelope with a copy of her husband's trust information and her own credit union pre-approval. The expression on Roger's face shifted from amused to uneasy in less than a heartbeat. As it turned out, Mid-State Groundskeeping was in trouble. Roger had overextended, bought too much equipment too quickly, taken on more contracts than he could support. His loan had a balloon clause coming due in 30 days, and the only thing keeping his head above water was the steady income from the Oak Bridge HOA. Samantha didn't haggle. She didn't posture. She made a formal offer that afternoon, wired a down payment that evening, and signed closing documents the following morning. By noon, Mid-State Groundskeeping had a new owner. Her name was Samantha Bailey. Her first executive decision? Terminate the Oak Bridge HOA's contract, citing gross ethical violations of fair housing compliance. Her second? Comb through every file, every invoice, every photo, every recorded conversation stored on the company's cloud account. She didn't have to dig far. What she found made her hands tremble, but not with fear. There were spreadsheets showing inflated charges for surprise inspections, notes on which households were less likely to contest violations, a memo referencing fine layering, with Leonard's initials signed in the margins, even audio recordings of Leonard himself coaching Roger on how to frame photos to look worse than they were. get the shadow angles, makes it look like more growth than there is. That evening, Samantha composed a single email addressed to every resident in Oakbridge Lakes. No commentary, no opinions, just the files, attached, time-stamped, and labeled. The subject line read, "Transparency, you deserve to know." And then, like the teacher she once was, she sat back and waited for the lesson to begin. It didn't take long. Within 48 hours of Samantha's email going out, the neighborhood buzzed with more energy than it had in years. Driveways became gathering spots, porches turned into planning hubs, and by the second day, someone had already filed a formal complaint with the county housing office. Leonard McKee was served notice of an ethics investigation by week's end. It wasn't just the internal HOA turmoil now, it was municipal oversight, and the quiet rumor that one of the residents had friends at the state attorney general's office. The HOA board scrambled into damage control. An emergency vote was called to determine next steps, but by then, most members had already seen the writing on the wall. 5 out of 6 board members resigned before the meeting even opened, citing personal reasons and unexpected conflicts. Only one, an elderly veteran who had abstained from most prior votes, remained, and he helped usher in an interim leadership team made up of trusted neighbors. And right at the center of it all stood Samantha. But she didn't seek attention. She didn't run for office. Instead, she focused on repair. With mid-state groundskeeping now fully under her control, she issued a sweeping policy change. All fines issued in the past 12 months, based on photographic inspections, were to be voided. Elderly and disabled residents were offered free lawn service for the rest of the year, no forms required. Community cleanup days were organized, led by volunteers, and managed with quiet coordination from Samantha's old teacher planner. Leonard, once the self-declared voice of order in Oakbridge Lakes, vanished from public view. 2 months later, a moving truck backed up to his garage early one morning. There was no goodbye, no farewell email, just a small notice tacked to the HOA board's bulletin, Lot 12 under new ownership. Behind the scenes, the newly installed board had filed a lawsuit against Leonard for financial misconduct. With irrefutable documentation in hand, he was forced to repay tens of thousands in restitution, money he had once pulled from neighbors' pockets under the guise of compliance. Roger's name, once printed in bold on every flyer and banner, disappeared without ceremony. His company never worked in Oakbridge again. And as for Samantha, she held on to mid-state groundskeeping just long enough to rebuild it right. 6 months later, with contracts restructured and new leadership in place, she sold the company for triple her original investment. And then, in a final quiet gesture, she transformed her front yard, the very place where it all began. The unassuming grass lot was replaced with a sprawling bed of wildflowers, stone paths, and a wooden bench that said simply, "Welcome." By spring, children were playing in it. Elderly neighbors came by to sit in the shade. Veterans brought folding chairs and read paperbacks. No one measured lawn height. No one took photos. Oakbridge Lakes had finally bloomed because one woman refused to be quiet when it mattered most.